So hello and welcome back to Go Again Gaming. My name is Az, and today we're just going to be going through another thought-provoking idea, strategy that has popped into my head today. So please, before we go into that, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification if you want to be notified, and all of that good stuff. So, is blocking the new aggro? Is the title of this thumbnail. Now, obviously, in a game of Flesh and Blood, it's all about trying to ultimately reduce your opponent's life total from 40 or 20 or whatever their life total is to 0 in order to win. So you would think that that means that you just have to attack, obviously, because that's the only way to reduce your opponent's health total, right? That's the only way to win, is to actually just try and attack as much as you can. Now, that's probably not the case, because we've seen a lot of decks out there and a lot of strategies that do care about blocking, but I'm thinking that blocking and having a larger deck size could be the key to a lot of things and a lot of matchups and stuff. So, what if blocking was the new aggro, is what I'm saying. So, consistently blocking, consistently parrying and controlling your opponent's best turns and living through the onslaught to then exact a controlled, focused, and inevitable end game. Now, I know that some heroes will just kill you outright with certain combinations of cards. But even if you can survive through those, if you can survive through the Channel Mount Heroics, if you can survive through the three-of-a-kind Rain Razors, if you can survive through the Revel in Runebloods, Mordred Tides, etc., if you can survive through that, then as long as you're sort of using your cards to defend against their best cards, as long as you've got more cards at the end of it, you should have the advantage. Now, one quick note on that, with regards to what I just said, the deck doesn't seem to work well. I'm going to go through a little strategy and mindset that I've been playing over the last couple of days, and I'll show you some stats with it as well. Doesn't work well into arcane damage dealing decks, or this strategy won't work well into arcane dealing damage decks, because we're more focused on the traditional block value and the block value of the cards and the damage that it prevents through actually blocking with the cards. Arcane damage is very different, because obviously you have to pitch into Arcane Barrier in order to block arcane damage. So this deck, this strategy, a little preface there, is not really geared towards things like Kano and Viserai and whatever else deals arcane damage, because we're more focused on the typical blocking. And as I said earlier, an outright cowabunga turn and combo kill does happen. That can always happen. Someone can just high roll you. But in a traditional Flesh and Blood setting, this deck, or this strategy at least, I think, is doing quite well. And I've got some stats, Talishar stats, to show you as well with the deck I've been playing. I think I've ran about 22 games with it now. But yeah, here is the overall thought process, if you're still here at this stage. And a lot of you probably would have dropped off already. Here are some quick maths to back up the plan before we go into it and what the sort of idea is. So let's say like a regular optimized meta opponent has like 60 cards in their deck. That seems to be the sort of maths, right? 60 to 63, 64 cards for an optimized deck. People know what they want to draw. People know what they want to play. They've gone through all of the sort of strategies and the percentages as to when and where they would draw certain cards in order to exact their strategy, etc. Right? So if you think about those 60 cards in a deck, and all of those 60 cards equate to 3 damage average. Now I know this is gonna vary from place to place, but take that with a pinch of salt. But these are the maths that I've done. So if every one of your opponent's cards equates to 3 damage, that's 180 damage there or thereabouts in total that you would have to deal with. So you'd have to block at least 180 damage in order to outlast them. Now, remember as well that in Flesh and Blood, you can have as many cards as you want in your actual deck that sits on your table. As many cards as you want. So if you're running like a full defensive block strategy, why not run all of the cards you can? Because ultimately, if you have a larger deck, you're going to have a larger life total, because you can block with more things. You can soak up more damage. And therefore, when you get to the end game, you're still going to have a load of cards left that you can use. And coupled with a few synergies and stuff here and there, which Ranger has access to specifically, that can be very, very deadly as well in the end game. So yeah, why not just run the full amount of cards that you can have? So my Azalea Fatigue deck, which is what I'm calling it, you might have seen the art that I made for this, and I could probably actually flash the art up for this. So let me just try and find that very quickly. But yeah, it's a deck that is obviously Azalea, but it's very defensive. It's Azalea that runs a Skullbone cross wrap as its main headpiece. So I'm just trying to flash up the image now for you, just so you can see and preface where this sort of idea came from. Because I was just messing around one day and I thought, oh, what would Azalea look like if she run a skull cap? And then I started trying it, and then I started thinking of the strategy, what the strategy could be behind this. And the deck that I've made is called Stalker, because it just likes to stalk your opponent and play with your opponent, frustrate your opponent. I'm just trying to find the graphics now for it. There it is. So here we go. There it is, look. Lovely. In all of its glory. There we go. And here's a little preface as to what you can come to expect from this deck. But yeah, this is the Azalea Fatigue deck. Obviously, she's wearing a Skullbone. Not Skullbone. She probably should be, but that's not the sake of this video. So she's wearing an Arcanite Skull Cap. She's got the Quiver of Abyssal Depths on her back. She's got the tunic on, obviously. She's got Bullseye Bracers, Perch Grapplers, and Dreadbore as the equipment loadout. And this is the actual loadout. We don't have any changes. No sideboard at all. No sort of null rune or anything for Arcane Barrier. We probably should have. But again, this isn't really an optimized deck. It's just an idea that I'm throwing out there, right? So you probably will fold to arcane damage dealing decks most of the time. You just have to race them in that case. You probably just have to try and cut down the deck size, and this is similar to a few other matchups that I'll go into when I go through the stats. But in certain matchups, I'm probably just going to try and cut down the deck for more sort of damage output, rather than trying to soak up damage when you can't effectively do that if you're against arcane damage dealing decks, as I mentioned earlier. But yeah, she looks cool. She looks awesome. I mean, come on, you know, who wouldn't want to run this deck? Look at how that hero looks. Absolutely awesome. Looks like you're just running around like an RPG world, collecting magical items and then putting them on your character, and this is how you look like, right? So it just looks awesome. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, this is the Azalea Fatigue deck that I've come up with. It's 74 cards and 6 equipment slots. So 74 cards. In most matchups, you run all 74, unless there's a certain few, which I'll go into in a moment when you can see the losses, where the losses are coming from. You'll be able to see what my strategy might be going forward into those. But yeah, so 74 cards and 6 equipment slots. Those 74 cards, they average out to around about a potential of 197 block value. So if we look at the maths earlier, if an average opponent who's running a 60-card deck can output 180 damage over the course of the game, we have 197 block in our deck from the card's block value. That's not including the equipment either. So obviously Skullcap blocks for 3 over the course of the game. Tunic blocks for 1. Perch Grapplers block for 2. I have toyed with the idea of switching Bullseye Bracers for something like Hornet Sting, which gives you an extra 1, but obviously the Bullseye can save you on certain turns and really put pressure on when you need to. So yeah, really cool. But yeah, apart from that, we don't do anything else with equipment. That's it. We just have that on our hero. We have nothing else. But yeah, based on the previous maths that we discussed earlier, you would still have a bunch of value to play with after you've worn your opponent out. So if you've effectively blocked 180 damage, or close to that, 150 damage if you've blocked with all of your cards. And also that number may vary depending on what sort of salvos and attacks you throw at your opponent as well during the game. But you would think that you'd wear your opponent out if you were able to block with pretty much every single card in your deck. You'd still have a load left over to fire, excuse me, and play with as well. And I did say earlier that Ranger has a few specific tools that really work into this strategy. So there's a few cards that do threaten this inherent inevitability of the fact that you're going to have to do something about this. Excuse me. Let me just flash up those cards now while I just have a quick drink because it's something stuck in my throat. But yeah, inevitability in these types of decks are very good, and this is one of them. Endless Arrow. Let me just move Azalea out of the way now. Endless Arrow is essentially a card that says you have to block me, otherwise you're just never going to get rid of this card. So it's one of those cards that's a 0 for 4. You know, it can just come in with a breakpoint, sometimes with a buff behind it as well, demanding 3 cards and a piece of equipment sometimes, that says you are running a fatigue. You're running against a fatigue deck. You need to block this card, otherwise I'm just going to keep firing it at you. And after the opponent's blocked with a load of their equipment, with a load of their good cards, they've spent loads of their good cards, having to block an Endless Arrow constantly is very, very annoying. So Endless Arrow is a great card. Obviously, it synergizes with other cards as well that we're going to go into. So yeah, Endless Arrow is very, very good. Another card which is also very good in this type of strategy is a card called Salvage Shot. Now, I run the yellows in my deck simply because it blocks for 3. It pitches for yellow, so it can load Dreadbore and fire it, and obviously it fires itself for 4 if you do load it, so it's got a breakpoint on there. But again, if it hits, put it at the bottom of your deck. So another card that just says this is never going to go away if you don't block it. And you know, blocking a Salvage Shot feels bad because it doesn't feel like it's very good. But in this deck and in this strategy, it can do a really, really good role. Again, Endless Arrow and Salvage Shot, very, very good. And something that really, really tops off all of this is the Quiver. The Abyssal Quiver, which I was given as a spoiler, which was fantastic. I got the Cold Foil Quiver. And again, this threatens inevitability from the very off. So you pitch a blue into this, and you get 3 arrows with different names from your graveyard back into your deck, which is just absolutely absurd. You can get so much value out of this, because if you block with... You can block for 9, essentially, with arrows, and then just pay a blue later and get all of those arrows back into your deck. Not only can you do that once, you can also combo that with things like Codex. So Codex of Frailty, again, rewards you for blocking with arrows, because you can then just fetch them out of your graveyard, get a Ponder token, make their attacks from their arsenal or their weapon attacks weaker, and you've got another copy of the arrow that you need in order to sort of threaten that inevitability factor of this fatigue deck. So yeah, all of those cards are amazing in this deck, and they're the cards that you want to see towards the end. And in the meantime, you want to throw out little salvos here and there, like Snatches and E-Strikes and CNCs and stuff, which we'll get into the deck in a moment. I'm not going to spend too much time on the deck, because this is it's not a tried and tested deck. I don't have any credentials as to what the deck could do, and obviously I'm not testing it against hyper-competitive meta opponents. I've only got some Talishar results to show you, but this is really just an idea that's come up, and that's what Go Again Gaming is all about. It's about ideas and thought-provoking things. So I just wanted to hear everybody else's thoughts, really, in regards to this. Let me just get rid of this Azalea now. I don't need that there. But yeah, when your opponent really has to think about blocking an Endless Arrow or a Salvage Shot, that's when you know you've got some good sort of purchase in the game, because they're thinking about, right, okay, what are we going to do here? We are going to have to block this, because it's just going to keep coming at us every single turn or every single time. It's not going to go away. Endless Arrow is obviously the better one, but Salvage Shot is still towards the end game. If you've got a Salvage Shot in your deck, you're still guaranteed that's going to come back every now and again towards the end. But yeah, Quiver and Codex of Frailty also very, very good, as I mentioned earlier. But if you also think about other characters that have this similar strategy, like Oldhim and the Assassins, etc., or any other class for that matter, they can also look at this form of defensive strategy, because they all have access to weapons which they can swing at their opponent for the end game, as opposed to rangers needing arrows. So a lot of the defensive decks like Oldhim and Assassins can really look at this strategy as well, because they can run a full deck and still have some equipment on board to throw at you. And they do have some really, really good defensive options, Assassins and Guardian, obviously. But yeah, I've been playing around with this janky Azalea list. I really like the idea of just trying to outlast and outvalue the opponent by running an excessive amount of cards and throwing some card advantage salvos in there every once in a while, just to give them something to think about. I also think that this tactic can also be quite frustrating and annoying to the opponent, which may cause them to question their own strategy, which some decks might not be able to deal with as well. So, but yeah. So let me just go into the deck list. Some of this is obviously scripted, as you can probably tell. But yeah, this is the Azalea Stalker deck. So yeah, exactly. It's got a very strange. It's a very strange list. Very strange list. We've got loads of poppers in there. Down and Dirty is great because if you don't have a turn, sometimes in this deck you do not have a turn. Your turn essentially is on your opponent's turn because you're blocking their stuff. That is your form of aggro. You're blocking their cards effectively as much as you can. Obviously, arcane damage is another thing, as I mentioned earlier. But yeah, Down and Dirty is quite cool because if you've got a card in your arsenal, like a buff or something that you put in there last turn, and you can't play it out because you blocked with your entire hand, you can just activate Azalea, filter the deck, put that buff to the bottom of the deck, which is great for later on, right, when you're trying to force through damage. And then if the Down and Dirty comes into your arsenal, you can then block with it from your arsenal, so it gives you more sort of purchase in the defense of the game, which is nice. So yeah, Down and Dirty is pretty good, and it's a popper as well, which is nice. So it sort of synergizes with what we were trying to do. One Death Touch, some CNCs, Battering Bolts. Yeah, so we've got 8 poppers in the deck, which I think is needed against Illusionists. Illusionists is quite a tough matchup anyway, so you can make an argument that those don't really matter, the poppers. I've ran a few games into Dromai. I've made a few changes since the results as well, so you'll see the results in a moment. But yeah, I've changed a few of these cards as a result of the sort of traditional get loads of dragons, Ash Wings, Mirror Guys, and all that sort of stuff. I did win against an Irish Dromai with this deck, but yeah, this the sort of standard Dromai lists are hard for any ranger, I think. But yeah, Endless Arrows, E-Strikes, Fateful Scenes, full suite of Infectings, 2 of Lace Withs, Life for a Lifes. Another thing we like to do in this deck is leverage our life total. So we've got Life for a Lifes and Scar for a Scars in here to leverage the life totals. Because Skull Cap is only turned on when you have less life. So we normally drop to 1 or 2 life below the opponent, so it turns on all of our Life Matters cards, like Scar for a Scar and Life for a Life, but also allows us to block critical cards with Skull Cap for 2, and maybe Perch for 2 as well. So again, we're turning on our Life Matters cards to potentially block out something that's going to be really bad. So we do need to do that. Often, and that's why we've got things like Life for a Life in here. So it's a 1 for 4 with Go Again. If it hits, you gain a life, so you get some life back. And obviously Scar for a Scar is just a 0 for 4 with Go Again. So there's a couple of life manipulation tactics in here as well to turn on certain things, depending on what your hand looks like, depending on what block you need, etc. Murkmire obviously is just there for getting through evasive damage prevention mechanics like Oldhim and stuff. My Oldhim matchup has been good in this deck. I think I'm 100% against Oldhim so far. Premeditate is just ridiculous. We need to have 2 of those in there at least. We don't run too many buffs in the deck because they don't block for very much. So we've got 2 of each buff rather than 3. Ravenous Rabble again, just a 0 for sometimes, most of the time, 3 or 4 in this deck. Can pop like dragons, well, not pop them, but attack them directly. And again, since we got crushed by multiple Dromais, we have added in the Scar for a Scars and the Life for a Lifes for Go Again against those smaller dragons. But yeah, obviously, of course, we've read the Glide Path, Red Ledger, Remorseless, Seek and Destroy, etc. Now, here comes the spicy parts of the deck, right? So we got a full suite of red and yellow Sink Belows. Yellow Sink Belows have been absolutely clutch, because normally when you get to that sort of mid to late game, a card that blocks for 3 can pitch for yellow and filter a card in your hand, especially with what your deck composition looks like, with like these Firedows, Fighting Spirits, and obviously these CNCs and Down and Dirties and stuff. You might need a higher pitch value card in order to play your next turn. Now, there's a lot of reds in the deck. So towards a late game, you need to be able to filter some of your cards later on. So yeah, yellow Sink Belows are very good, and also they can be played in a D-React step. So it can get around a lot of those A lot of those sort of tricks and stuff like warriors and assassins and stuff have. So yeah, added the yellows in. They have been every time I've seen a yellow sink below, they have been very good in that scenario. Coupled with the fact that obviously we might be on lower life, we've got perch grapplers and Arcanite Skullcap to block with. Sink below, having a block for 3 in the D-React step is very good, plus the card filtering, which can sometimes, filter you into another D-React if you need to go extensively tall on the block, etc. So yeah, very, very good card. Snatch, just a 0 for 4. Again, it's one of those cards that, if you block with your entire hand and a couple of pieces of equipment and you still got Snatch in your arsenal, Snatch in your hand, you can come out of your turn of just one card, that just being a Snatch, which threatens you putting you onto your arsenal for next turn, essentially. So it's always something that they have to think about as well. Now the codexes. Codex of Bloodrot has been very good in this deck as well. It's essentially it's essentially just an arrow reloader. So obviously you just put a card from your hand face down into your arsenal. Your opponent does the same. And it's unblockable damage. It creates a blood rot for them as well. So it's essentially just like playing or activating a bow, but then you're getting a ponder token and you're giving them a piece of damage that they have to worry about as well. So getting that damage through and reloading a card into your arsenal is great. So yeah, Codex of Blood Rot is very, very good in this deck. Codex of Frailty, of course, is ridiculously good, as we all know. And in this particular deck as well, where you want to block with a lot of your arrows sometimes, Codex is just another way of saying, even if you run 2 of Red Ledger, even if you run 2 of Remorseless, you can still get those cards back fairly frequently with things like Codex and Quiver of Abyssal Depths, etc. You essentially have more copies of those key arrows that you need, regardless of their total in your deck. They might be 2 ofs, but it doesn't matter because you see them. You can see them as much as you draw them anyway, if that makes sense. But yeah, Findal's Fighting Spirit, again, another popper that I completely forgot was in here. So we do have 10 poppers in the deck. But again, Findal's is great because it's just a 6 attack. Blocks for 2 but gains you a life. So obviously if your life really matters, you can manipulate that a little bit more. But again, it's mainly just in there for the popper and the yellow pitch. So that could be something that sort of goes in and out. But every time I've seen it, it's been pretty good. And then Yellow Salvage is very, very good, as I mentioned earlier, the salvage shots, because it's a break point, it's a yellow pitch, it's a block for 3, and if it hits, it just doesn't go away. So if you can get more if you can get more plays out of a single card in the game, that's when you know you're winning, because not only are you hemorrhaging cards from your opponent, you're blocking a lot of their stuff, but some of your cards are actually being played more than once. And you'll see the stats in a moment when I go over the stats. And then we've got blue headshots as well. But yeah, this is the deck as it is right now. Let's go on to the results here. So I've played 25 matches with a win rate of 60%. So 25 matches, lost 10. As you can see here, the spread is quite good with regards to what we're winning and losing against. So we can see that the main losses are coming from Uzuri, Dromai, and other Azaleas. I will say that one of those other Azalea games was very close. I think I misplayed. But yeah, these are the results. Obviously, we've won against Bravo, we've won against Dash, we've won against 2 Dorinthias, 1 Dromai, which is the Iris, Kano, Katsu, Levia, 2 Lexis, 2 Oldims, 1 Riptide, 1 Azuri, and then obviously we've lost against Viserai, because obviously that's a lot of arcane damage, so it's hard to block that. So again, that's one of the things that we have to think about going forward, is if we try and race these decks. We just take the damage and try and race them back, and maybe take out some of the cards in the deck. And again, similar to Azuri and Arachne that we've lost against, because they are essentially trying to do the same thing. They're trying to sort of trade cards away. They're running massive decks as well. So what the Assassins really, really do well against this type of deck is they debuff all of your blocking potential. So the Assassin, that's why our Assassin win rate is very low, is because they essentially counter this sort of strategy. They debuff all of your blocking cards, which when you're trying to block, that's the counter, right? You're just trying to get around that somehow, and that's what the Assassins do. Is they really, really do sort of plague your value on your blocks, which is very good. No pun intended. Dromai obviously has 2 losses and 1 win against a Dromai. The 1 win was against Iris. The 2 losses were against traditional, just load of dragons out. Again, if we've got loads of blocking cards, but every attack that they're doing is coming in for 1, 1, 1, 3, 2, it's hard to deal with because all of our blocks are not being spread out enough to deal with that. And that's why we added in a load of those Go Again cards and Life for a Lives and Scar for a Scars and Ravenous Rabbles and stuff. A couple of those losses were when the deck didn't have those in there. So we'll see how it goes. We haven't drawn into any Dromais yet. And then 2 losses against other Azaleas. I do remember one of those games being very, very close. But yeah, Dominate is a big thing. So Azalea obviously has access to a lot of Dominate. So that's probably where those losses came from as well. Dominate being something that you can't really chuck your entire hand under to block. But that's where things like Take Cover and that come in, right? Take Cover allows you to reload a card into your arsenal and then potentially play a D-react from your arsenal, which is good in some scenarios. I have been toying with the Reinforce the Line card. I've seen that being played quite a lot, and that's quite good at the moment. So maybe we'll see. But look at these stats here. Cards most frequently used to block Infecting Shot. So Infecting Shot is one of those cards that just blocks for 3, and if you codex it out, you're getting a lot of value off of that late game. Load of damage. So I use Infecting Shot to block quite a lot, obviously. Pitch, Codex of Frailty. So obviously you want to get that to the bottom of the deck. And make sure we can sort of close it out towards the end. Get Ponder tokens, get cards back of our choosing, depending on what the situation is, what the hero we're playing against is. And obviously, the card most frequently used to play 66 times out of 87, I've played Endless Arrow. So that is ridiculous. How many? That's basically double, if not treble, the amount of times I've played Endless Arrow because of how pivotal it is in this type of deck. A card that just goes back into your hand that you can keep playing over and over and over again. It's just one of those cards that really, really sort of buffs up these types of decks where all of your cards matter. Because Endless Arrow just says it's just going to keep coming back at you for 4 every single turn, coupled with and laced with buffs as well. It's just very, very, very good card. But yeah, Endless Arrow, the MVP of the deck probably at the moment. Look at that. Seen 87 times, played 66. But yeah, that is the deck. That is the idea. I don't know where I'm going to go with this deck, to be honest. I mean, by the time I play in the Calling, so thank you very much for Fluke and Box for sponsoring me to play in the Calling, buying all of my stuff for me. Although I am giving you the mat. That was our agreement. I'm giving you the Spicy Angel mat. I don't know whether I'm going to play this at the Calling in Birmingham because of the fact that Prism and the new heroes will be out by then. So I do need to just sort of understand what they do before this deck sees any play. But we'll see. What do you think? With regards to the overall sort of is blocking the new aggro, what do you think about blocking? Is blocking just a stupid idea? You're not dealing any damage to your opponent. You're just soaking up all of the damage here. You're not actually dealing it back, really, until you get to the mid to late game. But some of these results are pretty cool, right? 60% win rate, 25 matches played. Very, very good spread of heroes that it defeats. But obviously there's a couple in there that obviously we do fold to every now and again. But yeah, as I said before, this idea could be just pure copium. And I certainly don't have any credentials or any sort of results to back up this. Well, there's some results there, but it's just an idea that I've been messing around with a silly custom character, as we saw earlier. But leave your comments in the section below as to what you think if blocking could be a good strategy in general. I know there's decks that care about just soaking up all the damage and getting more cards out of your opponent's hand than cards that you're actually playing or spending. And that's the whole idea. But before we close off with having 74 cards in your deck, can that be just a new norm to have more cards in your deck to play with? Because card economy can really can come down to that, as we've seen in various Pro Tour matches. That's pretty much it for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. I've been Az from Go Again Gaming, and thank you to all my patrons as well who support the show here. And I just realised as well that we don't have a scene for the patrons. So I'm so sorry. I'm going to add that right now. But let me just add this image in for the patrons, because it's all about you, really. You're the ones that allow me to do this, and give me the sort of the strength to carry on every day. So there we are. Thank you very much to all the patrons. Andrew, Ziggy, Andrew, Connor, Pascal, Stewart, FabTG Cars, Collision Point, Big Boss, Dave, Eric, Andrew, Cameron, Ian, Aaron, Aslevian, Robert, Chris, Brad, White Rabbit, Lewis, David, Levi, P-Town, Noah, Primeval Titan, Logan, Jacob, Jonathan, Rhinotar, Kaz, Callum, Kevin, Nino, Ravenous Babble, Jason, Dex and Drafts, Joey, Greg, Capolo, Charles P, Chris G, Lee C, Gerard B. You are the best. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and we'll see you very, very soon on Go Again Gaming to do it all over again with a different topic. Cheers.